Today on The State of Us, Russia doesn't have a plan to win the new war with the West. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at Putin not really having a plan to win this war. Well, what do you mean? Surely you wouldn't have started a war if you didn't have a plan to win. Well, we're going to look at how this has become the West's war.
Well, you can have a plan to win the war and then it doesn't work and then you don't have a plan B.
I see.
You know,
maybe there was a plan.
I think there was a plan, right? Because
now maybe there's not a plan.
When Russia first went in, they were pushing back and, took the land that they wanted and were close to taking Kiev or Kyiv now. Excuse me, that's old person talk there. But now the West has gone from we're not going to do much support to we're going to give them pretty much whatever they want, and that was not the war that Mr. Putin decided to enter.
Not what he was counting on originally.
Right. I think so. I mean, I don't know. That's not to jump in too much and do the show in the first segment, but that's kind of my take on it.
Lance would never do that.
He kind of, no, never. I think Putin was just wanting to, let me take Crimea in 2014, so they'll let me take Ukraine, and because they really don't want a war, and they're worried about oil prices and want to count their money, and what do they care about this little Ukraine? And fact was, he was right. But as we're going to talk, there were some things that were done by the Ukrainians that all of a sudden changed the West's mind. And now Mr. Putin has a bigger enemy to fight. And he doesn't have a plan for that war.
Yeah. So I think that's a point well taken, that the war changes, right, as it goes. And it's changed a lot as we have stepped up, and we being collectively the West, right, what we're willing to do to help Ukraine. And that makes a big difference to, well, the plan that we had really doesn't work now, and now we don't have a plan. But we're already, we're past dipping our toe in the water. We're in up to our necks, and there's really no way out. So it's a little late to develop the plan now, So I think there's a lot of that going on, and that's kind of why we're going to cover 6 sort of key elements today from the Wall Street Journal. How this has become the West's war. In other words, it's not just Ukraine anymore. Reasons to continue. Why should we go on? I mean, why we know, right, generally, like, why should Ukraine go on? Okay. But why should the West keep funding this? Why should the U.S. keep supporting it? Why not just throw in the towel?
Well, and Poland sent some jets, and the British sent some helicopters and
tanks
and tanks
and money.
So it's not just the United States. That's the whole thing.
When we say the West, we're not just
really
being
talking
facetious.
about Europe, and we're going to talk, jumping in again. Sorry, but there's a segment on how's this going to affect Europe.
Yep.
Post-war, what's going to happen in Europe?
Yep. Because
this is going to have a big shakeout, because this isn't just the United States coming in. This is all these other European allies. And, it's not a segment, but this question pops up. How does it reshape NATO? What's going to happen? Because that's on the back burner here.
Yeah.
All these countries in Eastern Europe that Russia has always threatened to not join NATO, or else do they join NATO when this all shakes out?
Sure. Well, because this is the very thing that's like, if there ever was a reason to move, now's the time, So how this has become the West's war is the first thing. Second thing, reasons to continue the war. Third is that China's watching. Fourth is the length of the war. How long is it going to go on? 5 is nuclear blackmail and how that impacted the progress of the war. And 6 is what Lance alluded to, Western, right, European and American and other countries that are part of NATO's involvement in the war. So we've got a lot to talk about. But the first one up is the West's war. Try saying that fast. From the Wall Street Journal. True that no American or NATO soldier are fighting and dying on Ukrainian soil, but the U.S., its European allies, and Canada have now sent some $120 billion in weapons and other aid to Ukraine, with new, more advanced military supplies committed and on the way. If this monumental effort fails to thwart President Vladimir Putin's ambitions, the setback would not only undermine American credibility on the world stage, but also raise difficult questions about the future of the Western alliance.
You know, we're hearing things in the news today about banks being too big to fail. Again, is this war become too big to fail? You know, to that point, your last sentence in that article, what happens to the strategic power of the West if Ukraine folds up its tent and Putin gets everything he wants? I mean, who's going to sign up with the people who lose? Who's going to sign up and say, yeah, I'll join NATO.
That's not really how it works.
I'm going to join with Great Britain and Poland and the United States. And,
right.
And I'm going to fight with you guys because, hey, you stopped Putin. Oh, that's right. You didn't stop Putin. Never mind. I'm not going to join up with you.
If the U.S. wanted to end the war, could we end the war? Yes. How badly do we want to end it, right? And how important does it become to us to end it? Every day it becomes more important. You know what I mean? Because to your point, Lance, the deeper invested we are, the more aid that we've given, the more military supplies we've provided, the more people are looking at, okay, well, the odds are shifting, should be shifting in favor of Ukraine. So if they don't win, even when they had basically all this support from the West and all this advanced weaponry and all that, so is all that weaponry and all that advanced stuff really as great as we were all sold to believe that it was? Because if it wasn't enough to win them the war, and if after America had invested that type of money, we weren't willing to finish it, what type of message gets sent? And I know that's a question we're going to ask later on.
Yeah, but what does it take if you don't invest now and fight now? How do you get Putin to quit? You can't hold him. You can't keep giving him ways to continue the fight with the Russian people. I mean, again, we've done show after show, and it's always been do more, more, more. I understand the good money after bad, but at this point, if you agree with this, and I think we do, that it has become the West's war, then let's get in there and let's do what we need to do to show our superiority, at least to Putin, and then let's deal with the fallout. Let's deal with what other parts of the world maybe back off or start their own conflicts.
So reasons to continue the war. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about now.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, let's continue it and let's finish it.
It's a more ambitious commitment that carries much higher risks, but also strategic rewards for Western allies by providing all this additional assistance. By repelling the initial Russian onslaught, the Ukrainians have punctured the myth of Russia's military invincibility and proved that helping Ukraine isn't a hopeless endeavor. Just as importantly, the horrors inflicted by Russian troops across different parts of Ukraine have jolted public opinion in North America and Europe, spurring heretofore reluctant government into action. So in other words, there's a lot of components going on. And I thought what had really summed up well, Lance, was a different opinion piece that said, so the unnamed problem is that the presence of the observer affects the behavior of the observed, making the U.S. the key player in the war, whether it likes it or not. In other words, the notion of being able to dip your toe in on a scale like this is kind of a fallacy. The idea that we were ever going to be able to just kind of help and not make Russia too mad, we said it was not likely from the beginning. I think it's unlikely. And all we've done, mind you, since we said we didn't want to antagonize Russia, is keep antagonizing them by upping and upping and upping what we're willing to give Ukraine. Even inside the United States, the importance of what it's going to mean, for Europe, but also the world, is felt very strongly. And I think it's felt strongly across political parties, especially as we've seen, Ukraine actually make some progress. The ranking Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said this conflict is going to change the face of Europe as much as World War II did. I mean, you think about, for those listeners who know history, and I'm sure we have, a number of you that do, you think about how much World War II really did change the face and basically bring us what we've essentially come to know as modern Europe for the most part. We have somebody saying, who's the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, that that's what this is going to be. No, are as many people in total, and no, maybe not as many people are going to die, but in terms of reshaping the geopolitical climate, it's going to have that effect, because what started out as what Russia was hoping, which is an isolated them pushing into a weaker person and taking them over, much like they did with Crimea, became Europe saying, yeah, we're not going to let you just get that much closer to us without doing nothing. So we started giving a little help. It was enough to get Ukraine to keep them on their feet. Ukraine says, hey, we could really make some headway, so we give more support. And before you know it, whether it was the plan or not, we've now sort of drawn a real squiggly line in the sand here of we're not okay with you taking Ukraine, but we're also not really sure exactly what all we're willing to do to stop you from doing that. But we do know that we want to keep helping them, because we do know that we don't want you to take them over, because we do know that we want them to win.
So we spent a lot of time here talking about the West in Russia, but how does this affect the rest of the world as they're watching this?
Well, reasons to continue leads into some of the reasons aren't just what we've invested, right? It's what we alluded to earlier. If we don't succeed, what happens to the people watching? Who's watching? Let's find out. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. It's not just the fate of Europe that is being decided, according to an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. Russia has regained momentum after a mobilization last fall and is launching renewed offensives. In Asia, the Middle East, and elsewhere, the West's geopolitical adversaries are calculating whether the U.S. and its allies have the stamina and cohesion to defend the rules-based international order that has benefited the West for decades. Beijing is watching closely to see the price that Russia pays or the reward it receives for its aggression. What is happening in Europe today can happen in Asia tomorrow. That's NATO's Secretary General warning the Munich Security Conference this month. Quote, if Putin wins in Ukraine, the message to him and other authoritarian leaders will be that they can use force to get what they want. This will make the world more dangerous and us more vulnerable.
Well, if that sounds familiar, think of the Munich Pact in World War II, right? Where Western allies told Hitler, yeah, well, since you already have troops in Czechoslovakia, you can have Czechoslovakia as long as you promise not to do anything else. And Hitler said, I promise I won't do anything else.
We know how that went.
So now that's why there's a group there that looks at European world peace. And it's like, okay, this has a bigger implications. This isn't just Ukraine and Russia and the West, but now the Taliban, those people in the Mideast who are looking to take over, maybe some Palestinians in Israel, China and the South China Sea and Taiwan. Okay, we're just going to sit back and watch. North Korea. There you go.
I mean, I not to throw them in and just be
I don't know, man. Can you?
But
he's crazy.
He is crazy.
Do you think he watches anything? I mean, I don't know. I think he just does.
But think about, right? I mean, we see how much we've invested, and think about how much we've invested over the years in South Korea. I mean,
since the 1950s, right?
Right. Remember, folks, and people, we always, it's amazing how we forget this, but the most U.S. forces deployed in a single country internationally is in South Korea, So we've been there basically longer than anywhere else in the most numbers than anywhere else, because we've never figured out a way to be able to leave and not doom South Korea, So, but again, part of what's being watched, right, is how far can we be pulled into this without putting an end to it? And I think part of what we have to calculate on the back end too, it doesn't take geniuses to figure out if there was ever a time for some of these other people we've mentioned to make a move, it would be while...
I mean, do it now while we're busy somewhere else?
And, remember our military doctrine...
They wouldn't do that, would they?
For the past...
They'd play by the rules.
However many years has said that we have to be able to maintain, a full-scale war offensive, a full theater war. I think it's on two fronts, and anybody listening that knows better, correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's the military doctrine, is two fronts, right? Full-scale war on two fronts, which theoretically speaking, there's no reason that, why would we ever need to fight more than that? Well, okay, if somebody crazy, like the leader of a North Korea, decides now's the time to make a move, then does somebody who's more strategic and sitting back like China say, why don't we move now? Because these guys are distracted. They're caught up dealing with two different things. They actually have to fight a full-scale war now.
I just don't think, and I don't disagree with your premise at all, but I don't think right now, what I'm reading about China, they're not in any shape to start any kind of military issue with the United States. No matter how busy we are.
And that they're patient.
And it's like...
And that's why they're watching,
well,
right?
Yeah, I think they're watching.
How much punishment?
I think they're smart enough to look and say, yeah, we don't want to mess with this thing. Japan made that mistake in World War II. They were like, oh, the United States, they're, in the midst of a big, huge economic depression, and they're weak, and they're not going to do anything, and we're just going to bomb Pearl Harbor, and then we're going to go into the Pacific, and that old saying down south, let that sleeping dog lie. You don't wake up the old bloodhound that's just laying at the feet of the guy sitting in the rocking chair, because then you don't want to see how fast they can really move. And that's the mistake that Japan made in World War II.
China, for a long time, has been playing to win.
Right.
I'm not sure, and that's, remember, part of our premise today, I'm not sure that that's what Putin's doing anymore. You know what I mean? Because for him, it's just survival. I mean, maybe he was playing to win at one point.
He doesn't want to look bad now.
But now
I think he's trying to find a way out.
Yeah.
I said that the last time we talked about Russia, but I don't know what that is. And I don't know what it would take him to get out. I think he would need some land.
Yeah.
And I don't think Ukraine has any intention of letting him keep any land. I mean, in the article, it talks about...
they keep saying they're not even going to let him keep Crimea.
Exactly.
And if
that fight's going to go that far...
How does Putin end if he has lost Crimea too?
Yeah. If he starts a war where he already had Crimea and ends the fight
without it,
and negotiates a settlement without Crimea or anything else, his days are done, right? As leader of Russia.
For a proud country like Russia, and if you've lost, by the time that happens, right, folks, remember too that Russia has lost, the UK estimates as many as 60,000 troops so far. Okay, 60,000 people. That's that's a lot of people dead, And so maybe by that point, by having lost Crimea and now you're suing for peace and negotiating, you've lost over 100,000, people to this war. And what do you have to show for it? We lost territory. That's what you have to show.
Well, the only way
I don't know about in a proud country like Russia. I don't see that smoothing over real well.
I don't think that's the way it ends. If it ends in any form or fashion, it will be not to force Putin to the negotiating table, but to force the Ukrainians. And you say, well, how can you force the Ukrainians? They're winning. Yeah, they're winning with the West stuff. If the West goes to Ukraine tomorrow and says, we're pulling all the money, we're pulling all of the supplies and ammunition that are coming your way unless you negotiate a peace. That's how I see this playing out. That the West will not let Ukraine take back all the land and Crimea, because that doesn't benefit the West. They have to get Putin to the negotiating table so that we can be prepared for North Korea or China or the Middle East. We can't get bogged down here.
Well, when you talk about length of war, right, one of the key components is, well, what are the options for it to end? I mean, if we're going to know how long it is, we kind of got to know what's the end game. I think the problem is, right, at the moment, you have two end games that there's no reconciliation between. Ukraine has said that the goal is to reclaim all of their territory, which includes Crimea, that Russia has tried to take. And Russia says, basically, we need to take over Ukraine. And it's like, okay, well, those, middle ground, it's like, again, we always talk about compromise. Sometimes, though, you can't compromise an apple and an orange. You know what I mean? Like, they're not.
But in a war between Russia and Ukraine, Russia can achieve their goal. Ukraine can't.
Unless.
Well, that's the whole point.
Right.
They're only achieving what Ukraine is achieving, taking nothing away from their people and fighting.
Well, yeah.
But it was with $150 billion worth of supplies and weapons. So if that leaves, do you think Ukraine can stop Russia?
No.
So the only reason, Ukraine has a great fighting spirit.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. So I support it wholeheartedly, but they don't win without the West's support. So they are dependent on achieving their goal because of other people. If those other people pull their support, Ukraine would have to then negotiate with Russia, even if they didn't want to. Whereas it's not vice versa. Russia doesn't need anybody's help to defeat Ukraine if Ukraine was fighting Russia on its own.
Well, keep in mind, right? I mean, I think this is one of those things, again, that's easy to overlook. Ukraine had, in 2021, about 43 million people, okay? By comparison, Russia has 143 million people. So
it's 3 times bigger.
Right. Just in how long could you go with people? I mean, just if we were hand-to-hand combat, one person to one person, like Russia wins that equation, and that's just...
Which I think is what Russia thought they were going into.
Well, yeah, because, they were. I mean...
Because nobody
that's
stepped
what
in
they
and
were
stopped
going
them
into.
From taking Korea.
Right.
So they thought going into Ukraine was going to be the same way as they went into Crimea.
You're right.
Nobody was going to step in.
Right. Well, and they were fighting against either less advanced or equally advanced weaponry and machinery, which, in fairness to Russia and their strategy, I mean, everybody, how could they have miscalculated so badly? Well, keep in mind that the calculation was based on, we're going to be fighting somebody that has weapons as good or worse than we have. And we got more people. And we have a more experienced military. Like by all measures, right? If you're weighing that equation, like, well, yeah, we certainly should win. Well, okay, but the rules changed because the West all of a sudden said, yeah, we're going to give you some of our advanced weaponry and we're going to prop up your economy and we're going to make sure you don't starve. And like all these things that Russia's counting on causing a fold don't come to fruition.
Didn't materialize.
I mean, that makes a very big difference. Yeah. And again, not taking anything away from, because the people have to be willing to fight, right? Like, I mean, if Ukraine says, hey, we're not willing to fight anymore, like, well, it's over. So same thing with the Russians. I mean, the will of the people fighting is obviously incredibly important, but where does the will come from? Well, you have to feel like you can win. If you're getting slaughtered day in and day out and you never make any progress, it's really hard to keep going. And part of, I think, the reason that the Ukrainians are doing well is because they feel like we really have a chance. The West is behind us. They've invested. We're getting some of the weapons we've asked for and that we need. And we've actually taken back some areas that Russia took. I mean, they have real reason to be hopeful and optimistic about coming out the other side. But to your point of, well, the length of the war, how does it end? I think the length, it could go on a long time, because if nothing materially changes right now, Russia has the numbers to keep waiting. Right? And that's the big thing that they've got on their side. We keep upgrading Ukraine with better and better technology, weaponry. Okay, but again, Ukraine has less people. So Russia just says, well, we're just going to wait you out, because I mean, no matter how you slice it, you got some awesome weapons, but two things. We got nukes and you don't, and we have 3 times the amount of people that you got. And again, I think that's part of the problem because Russia's calculation was not to take over a hunk of land. It was to take over 43 million people. Well, if you win and everybody in Ukraine is either gone or dead, what did you really win? Well, you won a chunk of land, but I don't know that that was really the
intention in the first place.
No, because I don't think it was. Yes, they wanted territory, but again, if you added 43 million people to Russia's 143 million, all of a sudden, you've increased your population very substantially, so you've become a much bigger country. Unless we change our stance, I don't know that there's an end that's in sight, that's easily seen. And I'm open to people disagreeing, but we have to talk about the nuclear blackmail and also Western involvement. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Nuclear blackmail. I think this one is interesting because we've kind of talked about it before, but I thought the article did enough. You're getting slaughtered day in and day out, and you never make any progress. It's really hard to keep going. And part of, I think, the reason that the Ukrainians are doing well is because they feel like we really have a chance. The West is behind us. They've invested. We're getting some of the weapons we've asked for and that we need, and we've actually taken back some areas that Russia took. They have real reason to be hopeful and optimistic about coming out the other side. But to your point of, well, the length of the war, how does it end? I think the length, it could go on a long time, because if nothing materially changes right now, Russia has the numbers to keep waiting, right? And that's the big thing that they've got on their side. We keep upgrading Ukraine with better and better technology, weaponry. Okay, but again, Ukraine has less people. So Russia just says, well, we're just going to wait you out, because no matter how you slice it, you got some awesome weapons, but two things. We got nukes and you don't, and we have 3 times the amount of people that you got. And again, I think that's part of the problem because Russia's calculation was not to take over a hunk of land. It was to take over 43 million people. Well, if you win and everybody in Ukraine is either gone or dead, what did you really win? Well, you won a chunk of land, but I don't know that that was really the
intention in the first place.
No, because I don't think it was. Yes, they wanted territory, but again, if you added 43 million people to Russia's 143 million, all of a sudden, you've increased your population very substantially, so you've become a much bigger country. Unless we change our stance, I don't know that there's an end that's in sight, that's easily seen. And I'm open to people disagreeing, but we have to talk about the nuclear blackmail and also Western involvement. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Nuclear blackmail. I think this one is interesting because we've kind of talked about it before, but I thought the article did a nice job, Lance, of laying it out in a way that made a lot of sense of, why was the U.S. hesitant? Well, the U.S. was hesitant because we didn't want to get into a direct confrontation with Russia. Okay, well, why not? Because of what we just ended the last segment with. They have nuclear weapons, And remember, they have, behind the United States, they have the most nuclear weapons in the world. So, it's not like they don't have nothing. It's, do they have the same military advancements? Do they have as good a nuclear weapons? Maybe not, but they have nuclear weapons and they could cause a heck of a lot of terribleness across the world if they wanted to.
I'm just starting to feel like Putin doesn't want to use those nuclear weapons, though. I think he's looking for a way out. I would hope, because there's more. Because
we've talked about you can't win once that happens.
Right. There's smarter people than me doing this, but I really hope that there's some backline negotiations going on whether we're talking to Putin or not, that we're talking to some of the people that we know who have Putin's ear, because it would seem to me that we should be going to him and saying, okay, what gets you out of here? You tried. We stopped you. You don't want to blow them up because you know we can wipe you off the face of the earth. Plus, you don't gain anything if you blow them up. So we've shown that we're not going to let you have it. So what does it take to get you out of there? And then we can go in and force the hand, we being the West, can go in and force the hand of Ukraine saying, okay, you get to keep your country. Mr. President, you're a great communicator. We're going to let you have your country still, but you're not going to get Crimea, or you're not going to get this level. Because I really don't think, one, the West doesn't want to push Putin into feeling like all is lost and he has to use nuclear weapons. And I don't think Putin wants to use nuclear weapons. I think Putin's looking for a way to save face. And I think if we want the war to end, I almost think now it's on our table. It's on our timetable as to when it ends. Now, if we go to Putin and through back channels and he doesn't want a way out, question, do you take the risk of taking everything away from him and force him to use nuclear weapons? Would Putin use nuclear weapons if he thought the people of Russia were going to throw him out of government?
Does he game it out far enough? And you would think, given what we know about his history, you know, who he is, where he's from, that he would have to have thought through this, which is part of the reason he hasn't used nuclear weapons yet, is understanding that that's not going to save his power, you know, because, I mean, honestly, the narrative's based largely around, right? Like there's people in Ukraine that want to be part of Russia, you know, and we have to, you know, hell, if you kill them all, then like, I mean, are the Russians going to be okay with that? You know, are they really going to be okay with you murdering millions of innocent people?
Of Russian people. Well, let's understand, Ukraine was drawn from that World War II map. And so they didn't necessarily say, okay, everybody who wants to stay in Ukraine, you know, and Ukraine came from the Soviet Union.
Right.
So it's even changed, been drawn since World War II ended. So there are people who live in Ukraine who probably wouldn't mind being part of Russia.
Right. Well, we know there are.
Which was the premise of the invasion in the first place.
And the Crimea thing. And I mean,
but I still think this is, the more I think about it as we're doing this show and talking about it, I think the ball's in the court of the West as to when this ends. Everybody's looking at Putin. Well, but even this is a change for me anyway, and I think for you, we really thought Putin might use nuclear weapons 6 months ago. I mean, I did anyway. I won't speak for you.
No. I mean,
but I thought
agree.
I'm to the point now. The evolution of this process and of my thinking has gotten to, I don't think he wants to use nuclear weapons.
Well, and maybe he doesn't now, but maybe it was an option. You know what I mean? We talked about the evolution of things.
Right. We could be right in both cases. We could have been right that 6 months ago he was ready to use them and now he's not. I'm not worried about being right, but I think the end of this fighting is in the hands of the West, because the West can control Putin and the West can control Ukraine. Therefore, the West is in charge. I'm thinking of Theodore Roosevelt right now, okay? And the Salkland War, 1905, between Russia and Japan. The United States wasn't even involved. And Roosevelt played it to where both sides wanted to talk to him, and he mediated and won the Nobel Peace Prize, okay? And basically put the United States in that position of starting to play world power early in the 20th century before World War I and World War II. I think that's where the West is right now, is we're kind of on the sidelines involved with money and supplies, but we hold the keys to stopping this fight. And that's just my opinion. I don't know what you think. And I think the West being able to stop it shows our strength and our power. I think we show a weakness if we continue to fight.
There's a lot of ways for it to end, right? We've talked about that. I mean, ever since it started, lots of ways for it to end. One of the ways is to broker a deal like we talked about, which would be very much in line with, again, the role that we've been playing in the world since the last World War, is we don't engage in global-based conflict. We play quietly through, and sometimes not so quietly, through proxies, right? And we fight limited engagements and conflicts here and there, but we don't mobilize, we don't declare war, that's not what we do, because we don't have to. At the same time, I guess, and maybe that it's totally crazy, but I guess I just want to throw it out there for people to give us their thoughts on isn't there an opportunity before us that maybe is just now becoming clear? If Putin's decided that nukes are off the table, if they're really not a realistic option at this point, does that mean we could broker a deal? Yes. Does it also mean that we could end Putin's reign? Maybe. Maybe we could deliver back to the Russians what they were promised in the 90s, which was to have a republic. And they actually did have for, a little while, not very long, but they had, a democracy for a short time. And then Putin came along and basically, it wasn't just him, but, he was a big part of of making that happen.
Well, he changed the Constitution
yeah,
so he could be president for life.
Right. I mean, that makes a big...
You can vote on me every time I run for the rest of my life. So we still have a democracy.
The people of Russia had, for a very brief time, a democracy, and they basically lost that and have progressively lost more and more of that as time has gone on. And they have a totally state-controlled media. What do you expect? Not that it's our job to liberate, the Russian people, not that they even believe they need liberated. But again, how long has Russia been a thorn in our side in one way or another? Well, basically, since we entered the world stage, they've been a pain in our butt one way or another, and what have we done with everybody else that's been a pain in our butt? Well, I mean, historically, we
get rid of them?
Well, we totally reshape them into something that is 100% in agreement with us and basically our ally. I mean, Germany, we went to a world war to stop them. And now, they're one of our very closest allies. And by the way, one of the places that we have the most troops, Korea, right? I mean, terrible conflict. And well, by the way, now South Korea is one of our, you're
taking what I said one step further, so I'm not going to stop you. I think that would be wonderful. But I think at the very least, so are you, I guess, in a roundabout way, you're agreeing with me, the power to end this doesn't end with Putin.
No.
It ends with the West.
It ends with the West. And yes, we're talking about...
The West can end this whenever they want.
There's 40 million people, right, in Ukraine who we're talking about their freedom and their rights. And we absolutely should be, because they deserve to be talked about. But why are we also not talking about the 143 million people living in Russia who are not living the same way? They're fighting a war because they've been misled and because they've been lied to. And they're sending not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of their people to die based on a lie. And I don't know that it's become more than what it was originally.
That, right?
But they don't know. I mean, how is it fair to ask them to make a decision to change things if they don't know, if they don't have the information to change it? I don't think so. I mean, again, people might be like, well, Russia's the aggressor. No, Putin is the aggressor, right? Is there people in Russia who are with Putin? Yes, they're with Putin because he has told them his truth. They've not had the freedom to make up their own mind. And I think
that's
that
fair.
It's more than just about yes,